House, and then in 2014, Republicans took back the Senate. So if Democrats were leading in the polls during Trump's first midterm, that would be entirely expected. And there was a point in time in which they were leading in the polls. Now, I think most would say that there's little chance that the Republicans could lose the Senate. So this is unique in that we're not seeing the types of drop-offs that Republicans would typically see. I think, I'll just make this other point, though, and that's just in a generic and, in a vacuum. Here we have, of course, the Trump personality involved. We have the Kavanaugh hearings. There are so many other things that I think are going into affecting the public sentiment about these upcoming midterms.
Well, what about the House, though? That's the one that initially they said there was a good chance. I mean, we're looking a year ago or so. They said, well, there's a good chance that Republicans will lose the House because typically that's what happens in the first midterm after a president gets elected. And so you're going against some headwinds then. I would argue that for the last 3 or 4 or 5 months, at least the media has seen it as a fait accompli that the House will flip and become Democratic. And I still sort of see that general sense out there. But increasingly, it looks like the congressional ballot is tightening some. There's more optimism moving towards the Republicans now. Do you? You certainly wouldn't be surprised if Republicans lose seats. Do you see this as a flip right now, or is it just too soon to tell with all that's going on?
I think it's too soon to tell. I mean, we can see some of the battleground in the United States House raging right here in Texas. Some of the Republican districts are really very much being contested for the first time in a while. I mean, it was. We have, the Pete Sessions locally is in a tight race for District 32. Of course, we have, Ron Wright, who's Republican running for Joe Barton's seat. It looks like he will hold on to that. But you've got, District 7 with John Culbertson. You have Will Hurd down in District 23. So there are, what we're seeing nationally, we can also see raging right here in Texas in some House seats that are being hotly contested. I think it's a number of things that are causing that. I mean, there is undoubtedly a Trump effect for in some districts. That's a positive effect. In others, it's not a positive effect for Republicans. But I think you could probably point to the Kavanaugh hearing as it would point out to a lot of voters that a lot of the politics in Washington is just frankly broken. And if you think that Washington politics is broken, then you don't run back to the Democratic Party. Instead, you come to the Republican Party, where Trump has made a name of calling out of Washington bureaucrats and not playing the Washington game. And so I have to feel that as we get closer, likely voters are going to take a hard look and say, do we want to reward the Democratic Party, or do we want to at least support a president who is, for better or for worse, is not playing the typical Washington politic game?
Well, the country has been watching the Cruz Beto O'Rourke campaign because Democrats have been optimistic that they would be able to take the first time in years they'd be able to take a statewide seat, and that just 3 or 4 weeks ago, those polls were running pretty much neck and neck. Some even showed Beto O'Rourke a little bit ahead of Cruz, though the last poll I saw, which came out today, has Cruz up by, I think it was 8 or 9 points, and that's about where you would expect it to be.
Yeah, so I think the best thing that happened to Cruz was some of this early concern that he might be in trouble. I've never thought Cruz was in trouble in a general election. Of course, it's tighter than, let's say, Governor Abbott's race is with Lupe Valdez. Mm-hmm. So there is a gap there. But I've never thought Ted Cruz was really in genuine peril of losing his seat. But what those early polls did do was motivate the Republican base. And so now we're seeing, Cruz leading by 9 points. And what's even more significant, I think, is that the majority of likely voters, 97% in Cruz's instance and 95% in O'Rourke's instance are firmly entrenched. And of the remaining, there's only like 50% haven't decided yet. So, basically this race is already cooked. And, I think Cruz is going to win by at least 9 points. There's just not a lot of different undecideds out there to change that race. And that's what we would expect to see. I mentioned Greg Abbott, his race, he's leading by even a larger margin. And that's pretty much baked in too. I mean, there's not a lot. I don't think there's going to be a lot of surprises in the Senate race or the statewide races come election night.
My guest is Wade Emmert, and stay with us. We'll come back with more discussions about politics and the elections.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A number of columnists and political thinkers have tried to explain why there is so much hate in the public arena. Shelby Steele is a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He has some profound insights on why the left is consumed with hate. He takes us back to the 1960s when this country finally accepted that slavery and segregation were profound moral failings. So the left put itself in charge of righting this wrong, thus giving it enormous political and cultural power. It also led to the greatest array of government-sponsored social programs in history that have cost more than $22 trillion. He believes that this amounted to a formula for power that goes something like this. The greater the menace to the nation's moral legitimacy, the more power redounded to the left. Soon they had compiled a laundry list of menaces. Racism was at the top of the list, but other bigotry ending in ism and phobia were also making the list. This has created a problem for the left. America has made significant progress in racial issues, along with progress with many other issues, and this threatens the left, whose existence is threatened by the diminishment of racial oppression. It must find racism anywhere it can in order to make itself relevant. The white-on-black shooting in Ferguson, Missouri got lots of media attention and even a comment from the President of the United States. During that same period, thousands of black-on-black shootings took place in Chicago, hometown of the then president, yet they inspired very little media coverage and no serious presidential commentary. Today, the left is troubled by its possible obsolescence. There is not enough social menace to service its need for power. It's easy to see why the left is consumed with hate. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth. Michael Youssef.
I tell you, I always look forward to being with you, Kirby. You truly give me a good intellectual challenge. In any way that you are gifted, or God called you to do, as long as you are involved in some way, and that is the plea I have with your listeners, Kirby, that please do not just listen to a program like this and then go, well, that was an interesting thing. No, I want to challenge you. Get involved. Find out what Kirby Anderson is doing. Find out what other ministries are doing. Get involved, because it is only when the believers really take their faith seriously, that can we turn the world upside down. I believe that with all my heart.
Point of View. Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And Point of View is back. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. My guest this hour, Wade Emmert, who was the Dallas County Republican Party chairman from 2011 to 2016. And we're talking about politics and the elections coming up. Wade, one of the things I'm hearing people discuss on the, especially the pundits in the media, is they often come up and say President Trump is just the most disliked president in a long time. His approval ratings are way down. But I was just looking at the Rasmussen poll of approval, disapproval, and he certainly has a high number of strongly disapprove. But in their most recent poll, and they track this daily, they've got 49% total approval, 50% total disapproval. And President Trump for the past several days has been in the high 40s or low 50s, which doesn't sound that bad to me.
Yeah, I think President Trump is really a product of the polarized political scene we have. The Quinnipiac poll that came out yesterday late or early this morning shows that among Republicans, his approval rate is 93% to 6% disapproval. And among Democrats, they disapprove of him 91% to 6% who agree with him. So it depending on you love him or hate him based on your political preference among independent voters. Yeah, it's 58 disapproval rate to 30%. But I think realistically, Trump is not the issue. Trump is a product of a dysfunctional political environment, and again, I think that's precisely what propelled him to the White House. People who didn't think any of the other 16 candidates for the Republican nomination could actually make a change in Washington. And Trump, who is decidedly not a politician, as he proves several ways over and over again, in a lot of ways that plays into a lot of his charm. And I will tell you that the liberal media, and especially those, the Jimmy Kimmels of the world, or even the Taylor Swifts of the world, who lash out at him, I think in a lot of ways are just playing in to this mentality that people are sick and tired of D.C. They're sick and tired of kind of the liberal creatives thinking that, and their point of view. And the more we see them come out against Trump, I think in a lot of ways it just solidifies his favorables. Now, I mean, I get it that independent voters don't know what to think about Trump. But again, I think that's part of his charm, and you can look at if charm is the right word. I'm not sure it's part of his appealability, maybe. I don't know. But you can see, if again, I go back to the Kavanaugh hearing, not necessarily for the outcome, but it just shows what a dysfunctional process we have. And again, I think in a lot of ways that plays into the Trump narrative.
The 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to call in and talk to Wade, ask him a question about what's happening in these elections, 1-800-351-1212 is our line. You can also go to pointofview.net, click on today's show, and we have more information up there about Wade. We also have a link to a publication that my organization, the Institute for Policy Innovation, just recently released, a trend tracker. It's a snapshot of the Trump economy, where we've got 10 different graphs in there, sort of showing what's happening in the economy and with various types of polls that are out there. And Wade, one of the things that I've been tracking is, again, going back to Rasmussen, they've for decades or years tracked whether or not people think the country's moving in the right direction or wrong direction. For years, President Obama was really in the tank on whether or not the country was moving in the right direction. He was often in the 20% range of the public. Sometimes in 2012 and 2014, he was down in the 13-14% range of the public thinking the country was moving in the right direction. interestingly, when Donald Trump came in, it took a spike up. You see that in January, it moved from around the 30% up to 47% right after his inauguration. Took a bit of a dip during the repeal Obamacare fight, but it's been back up in the high 30s, low 40s since. It seemed like a number of people in the country believe the country is moving in the right direction, even if they're not that satisfied with President Trump and his personal and his tweets or his appearance and other things. They think things are happening in the right way.
Yeah, that's kind of there's a dichotomy in the president. I mean, there are certainly policy issues that I think most people would favor, at least certainly independents and conservative people would favor. Then there's the tweets and his persona, which you either kind of deal with it or you loathe it. But regardless, I mean, the policy, I think for the most part, among conservatives especially and independents, people are pleased with the direction of the country. But if you listen to the liberal media, I mean, everything is just the worst it could be. Who was it that locally, John Wiley Price released a mailer comparing Trump to Hitler, trying to get people out to vote for Democrats. Well, that's precisely the type of rhetoric that Democrats fall prey to. That's exactly the type of imagery, that and racism, that they try to employ to justify their positions or to justify why you should vote Democrat. When their policies don't create enough excitement, they go about demonizing the other side. And so, I think for the most part, people are pleased with the direction of the country, although, John Wiley Price might disagree.
Well, you mentioned John Wiley Price, a Dallas County elected official.
Commissioner, yeah.
But he's also black. And I bring that up because President Trump frequently highlights the unemployment rate among black Americans is down to its lowest point. And in the trend tracker that we published, I went back and looked at unemployment in the unemployment in general, and then unemployment in the Hispanic and black populations. And of course, he's absolutely right. What's interesting to me is when you look at the graphs of this, beginning around January 2016, so a year before Trump takes office, the unemployment trend had been trending down. It had been declining. That's why President Obama says thank me for this, because it was all this good economy is because of me. It had been trending down, which is what you'd expect after a deep recession. But around 2016, the beginning of 2016, it actually leveled off for about a year and didn't start its decline again until January 2017. You see that in the overall unemployment. You see that in Hispanic unemployment. You see that in black unemployment. That something happened there in 2017, which sort of gave businesses the confidence to be able to again hiring and feeling like this is going to work out better for us. And we've seen record low unemployment, down to 3.7% now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, that doesn't fit into the Democrats' narrative. And so, when you can't point to jobs, then you point to, someone's color of their skin, and you start trying to paint, policies and the president and kind of a racial light that try to keep Democratic voters away. Again, you go back and look at the president's election, and you saw states that were trending in Hillary's favor and traditionally voted Democrat vote for the president. And so anything that the Democrats can do to change that narrative, I think they have to. Otherwise, they can't point to policy. So why don't we start attacking people and calling them racist and calling them Hitler and those types of things? And that's what we see that they're doing. And so bringing it back to, I think, your first question, how is this affecting the generic congressional map? I think that's why we're starting to see, when an election is a ways away and people are asking, who are you going to vote for? Well, I saw, on Saturday Night Live, they were making fun of the president for something, and I think the president probably shouldn't have done that, so I'll probably vote Democrat. But as you get closer and closer to the election and you start seeing these ads, you start seeing this rhetoric.
Wade, let me get you to hold that point, because we've got to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be back.
Former U.S. Representative and Army Lieutenant Colonel Alan West.
What really does upset me, our ministries, our voices has to struggle to get their message out. And then we ask ourselves, why are we getting beat so much in the media sphere? This is what we're up against, folks. We don't support our own causes, but they have millions upon billions of dollars to do it. And if you want to keep your freedom, if you want to pass on with the greatness of the United States of America to your children or grandchildren, $1 a day? Come on now. We could do that. Kirby Anderson can't call George Soros. The other side can, and the other side does. We want to win this thing? Let's help support this ministry.
Imagine Paul Revere decided he was too tired on that night in 1775 if he'd sat home thinking someone else could do the job. Don't delay. Accept Colonel West's challenge. Do what you can as a beacon of truth. Now is the time. Write into pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And we're back. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And with me this hour is Wade Emmert, who was the former chairman of the Dallas County Republican Party from between 2011 and 2016. And also joining me here in studio, Charles Stolfus, who is a pastor at Denton Bible Church. He'll be with me for the next couple hours on our other topics that we have coming up later today. So, Wade, one of the things when people ask me about what do I think's happening in the election, I have to say, you've got headwinds going into a midterm election. That's historically true. The other thing is, and what really sort of turns this on its head is Donald Trump has always outperformed people's expectations. It's just amazing to me. Who would have thought? I don't think many of us thought when the 2016 presidential race kicked off that Donald Trump would be the last man standing. But he started out, he was the sort of the lead person when they would take the polls, and he stayed on top all the way through. It's just amazing how he has outperformed people. He did so in the 2016 election. Do you think there's a chance he outperforms here?
Yeah, I mean, President Trump is different. I mean, that's why, in a sea of other, politicians in the Republican primary, he was different. And he said things that got people riled up, both for and against him, and as a result, the media covered him. And so he just has a way of I think people, they may not always agree with the things that he says, but they always know where he stands. And as a result, I think people, are, they're drawn to him. Does he outperform here? I think he probably does. Look, we were talking prior to the break about what's going to happen in the House. And look, I tend, as a former county chairman, I tend to be a cheerleader for the party. I don't know what's going to happen if we're going to retain the House or not. But I do think that the Democrats grossly misplayed the issues with the Kavanaugh hearing, confirmation hearing. And as a result, those who might have tended to support the Democrats are now taking a second look at, are the Democrats really different from the Republicans in the way they go about their business? And so I think that's hurting them had they not had that type of taken that kind of strategy toward the confirmation hearing. I think, maybe things would be, they could cruise a little bit easier to take in the House. Now I think that's not such a sure thing. And I think we might very well see Trump outperform in the congressional midterm.
1-800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. If you'd like to talk to Wade Emmert, have questions for him. Wade, let's talk just a little bit about the accuracy of polls. It has become, to try to do a scientifically valid poll, they have to call people randomly. They have to get a lot of them. I don't know anybody who answers. Most people don't have a landline at home anymore. I do because I do talk shows every now and then. But most people don't even answer their landline at home, but just because there's so many spam calls out there. How do we, can we really trust the polls anymore?
I guess it depends on how you conduct the poll. I mean, it's becoming increasingly difficult to get a statistically valid poll. More and more people use mobile phones, and it's harder to get demographic data as to whose numbers, who's on the other end of the call. I mean, with numbers changing as often as they do with porting and all that. So I think it's increasingly hard to know who is answering your questions. But I think part of the problem with polling is that people don't have to be honest with you. Your poll numbers may be exactly accurate as to what people told you, but that may not necessarily be what they do, or they might change their mind over time. So, polling is inherently suspect, I think, because you're relying on the veracity of the people you're talking to. And that they actually know what the issues are. They're not just saying something because they're put on the spot to answer a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead and finish up.
Well, I was just thinking of the man on the street skits you see on some of these late night talk shows, and people just make up stuff, and you'll have people agreeing with them. I think that's the vast majority of people who are answering these polls, and as a result, they're suspects.
1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk to Wade Emmert. But we do have a problem. They were talking about this in the last couple of days, the gender gap. It does seem to be that younger people tend to be more excited about the left. Then they eventually get out of high school, get out of college, start paying taxes, and tend to change, so that by the time you get to be in your mid-career or later career, you tend to be more conservative in your voting. But what do we do to reach out to young people?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I dealt with that a lot as chairman of the party in Dallas County. I remember vividly an event that I did. It was me and the Democratic chair at a young voters forum. And one gentleman, African-American gentleman, raised his hand and said, look, I think most of us in this room are actually pretty conservative, at least from a fiscal perspective. Where y'all lose us is on the social stuff. And, I hear what he's saying. So much so of the Republican Party is, a consolidation of different viewpoints, of which the religious right, if you will, is an important part. But I think the Republican Party as a whole, we certainly cannot reject and should not reject that part of the party. But instead, I think maybe we embrace the concept of liberty. The idea that in order for me to defend my right to worship my God the way I choose to worship my God, then I have to defend your right to live your life the way you want to live your life. And so maybe as a Republican Party, if we embrace this concept of liberty, we will bring in more of those millennials. And in fact, I've had many talks with millennials about that very topic and liberty, the ability to keep government out of my life. That is very compelling to a lot of young folks. And in fact, that fits nicely into the Republican Party's notion of limited government. I think we should, as a party, embrace that more.
And Charles is going to come in with a question.
Yes, Wade, the influence of the evangelical community has been much talked about in the aftermath of the last election in 2016. How do you see evangelicals coming to the polls this time in this midterm election?
Because Trump's not on the ballot, even though he says he is.
Right. And in fact, in the wake of these last 2 years, we've got lots of challenges to religious liberties. And you've just talked about liberty, but religious liberty, one of the first and foremost of them, deeply concerning to Christians. How do you see the evangelicals performing? Will they show up this time?
Well, I thought we saw them show up with Trump, and Trump was anything but really the traditional evangelical candidate. The way I reconciled that back in 2016 was the notion that evangelicals just wanted a change in D.C. and didn't think, any of the other candidates had the capacity to make that change. And so they supported Trump despite the fact that, some of the allegations that were whirling around him during the last 30 days or so of that election. So, if the evangelical voters, and I'll put myself into that category, I'm an evangelical voter. I mean, there are certain litmus tests that I have, but I think for the most part, evangelical voters are looking when the decision is simply between a Republican and a Democrat. I think the answer is pretty obvious. A party that supports abortion versus the party that supports life. I mean, those types of issues. Even if the evangelical doesn't agree with every position of the Republican candidate, they sure don't agree with the platform of the liberal candidate. And so, if evangelical voters, keep that perspective in mind, I think they will be squarely within or in the Republican category.
And of course, Trump really came through on the issue of the Supreme Court with two great, twice. And so it really has confirmed their support of him, and I could see that really extending on through this midterm election.
Yeah, that was a narrative during his campaign that, regardless of what you think about Trump, it's the Supreme Court that's going to hold the key, and which was absolutely true. And we've seen Trump, although some people were skeptical, we have seen him nominate 2 conservative justices. So, and we can expect that type of commitment to continue. I mean, he's at least following through on many of his promises that he made on the campaign trail, and I think it benefits evangelicals and really anybody who supports personal liberty.
Wade, when we come back from the break, let's ask the question, are conservatives and Republicans the same thing, or is the Republican Party moving away from conservatism? You're with, this is Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Wade Emmert is my guest. If you want to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Riley Bembry returned from World War I a changed man. Upon his return, this former Army medic settled in Los Angeles and became a butcher. But the city could not contain him, and he headed into the Mojave Desert and became a prospector. By the time the Great Depression gripped the nation, other veterans of the Great War had found their way to Bembry's cabin, each seeking to escape the emotional and physical scars left from the war. Together in 1934, they erected a simple 7-foot monument atop a rocky outcropping not far from Bembry's cabin, but miles and miles from anything else. They chose a common symbol to honor war dead, a white cross, and dedicated it to honor the dead of all wars. When Bembry died in 1984, Henry Sandoz, Bembry's close friend, began to care for the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial Cross. In 2001, someone sued. A judge would eventually order the memorial hidden from view, literally covered with a padlocked bag, while the case was decided. First Liberty had the privilege of working with Henry Sandoz, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and others to defend that memorial. Before he was senator, Ted Cruz volunteered his time as lead counsel on the case. Because of Henry Sandoz, Ted Cruz, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and First Liberty, that memorial still stands today just where Bembry placed it in honor of the dead of all wars. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kirby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And we're back. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson on our final segment this hour of Point of View. And with us is Wade Emmert, former GOP chairman of the Dallas County, and we're talking about elections and politics. Wade, as I finished the last segment, you hear people who have been aligned with the conservative movement. I see Max Boot, used to be one of the features editors of the Wall Street Journal, Bill Kristol with the Weekly Standard, a number of people who identified as conservatives who now claim that the Republican Party, that Donald Trump has moved the Republican Party away from traditional conservatism. Where do you fall on that? Is that a fair assessment? Is it partially true, or do you think they're just wrong?
Well, so presumably the Republican Party, I guess, would be a subset of all those who identify themselves as conservatives. So, if Bill Kristol and others label themselves conservatives but not part of the Republican Party, presumably then there's other conservatives out there. I think that's, interesting question. I mean, I think Bill Kristol, I think his problem is he just doesn't like Trump, and a lot of these people, they just don't like Trump. It's not a policy perspective. They just don't like his demeanor or his personality. Because I don't think it's the level of conservatism or how conservative the policy is that's driving him away. I think both political parties, frankly, want to define themselves to include all of the people in their base, plus as much of the independents, if you will, as possible. But what we're learning is that doesn't necessarily mean you run to the middle to do so. In fact, I think in a lot of cases, you do what Ronald Reagan did, and you articulate the case for conservative principles. You don't just water them down, because then you disenfranchise or at least disillusion the party, your base, while at the same time giving a lukewarm, defense of your own policy. So the answer is not to run to the middle. And so to Bill Kristol and others, I would say, look, get over the personalities. Let's focus on the policy, because at the end of the day, I think the policy is what's going to persuade voters, not the personalities.
I heard Mark Levin, the radio talk show host at CPAC this year, and he started out by saying, he said, I don't think Trump is really an ideological conservative, but he does conservative things. And that seemed to be like a fair assessment of it. And you can arguably say that he's done more conservative things, especially moving the embassy, the United States Embassy to Jerusalem, and other things that others have said they would do. So he seems to be moving in those circles, even if he's not ideologically a conservative.
Well, I think he's not. I think he's ideologically a conservative in many respects. But in the notion of limited government, I think he's less of a conservative. I mean, he's from New York, and that's a big government place. And so whether you wear the Republican banner or not, you still believe that government has a major role in your life and in the economy. And so I think that's where he's coming from. And so in that sense, he's more of a big government Republican. But I think on other policy issues, he's legitimately conservative.
Yeah, and in light of this discussion right here, I'm sure you're aware of Eric Erickson and his statement recently that he has come around to support much of what Trump has done. I don't know if he has said he's going to vote for him next time, but I mean, just the effects of Trump, the policies that he's actually worked for, I mean, they've been very conservative.
Yeah, I mean, you just need to look at things that Trump's doing, and like I said, to the Bill Kristols of the world, who don't like Trump because of his personality, get over it. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, and in some ways, that personality allows him to be effective. I personally, that Trump is one of those guys that, there is some bad that you take along with the good. The question is, does the bad outweigh the good? I don't think it does. I think good much outweighs bad, and I think that Trump the good things from Trump, vastly outweigh what we would have gotten had Hillary been elected. So while Trump's not perfect, boy, I sure do appreciate a lot of things that he's doing.
Take a couple of minutes, Wade, to tell us what you think happens if Democrats do retake the House.
Well, it's a good question. If Democrats take the House and Republicans hold on to the Senate, there's not a whole lot they can do. We found ourselves in that same position in 2010 with controlling the House but not the Senate, and we could pass all the Obamacare repeal Obamacare laws that we wanted to out of the House, but they weren't going to get anywhere in the Senate, obviously. So I think the Democrats would find themselves in much the same position. They would have a bully pulpit, although presumably Nancy Pelosi would be the speaker again. And I don't think she's the best advocate for the Democratic side. So while I don't want to lose the House because we need the House, I don't think from a grand scheme of things that it gives Democrats much more than a bully pulpit. Of course, it might hamper the president's ability to legislate. There's certainly things that Republicans need to continue. We might see hearing after hearing on net neutrality or whatever else has gotten Democrats riled up. But in the grand scheme of things, there's not a lot they can do with just the House.
Yeah. Take one more minute just to talk about the problem that they're facing in trying to do that, and the fact that is the ads that I see from Democrats typically don't state out a lot of policy positions. They all want to say they're independent. I'm going to be an independent voice in there, and that because you brought up Nancy Pelosi. Well, wait a minute, aren't you actually going to vote for Nancy Pelosi? Are you really going to be independent?
Well, I heard those same words, Colin Allred ad recently against Pete Sessions. He says, I'm going to be an independent voice, and then the next commercial is a Democrat congressional committee ad for him. There's no way he's going to be an independent voice. Independent voices don't get elected. He's going to be an advocate for the Democratic Party, and so, this type of rhetoric is just not helpful, and it's more of to your point about there not being a lot of policy statements in these ads. There's never any. They don't have policy positions. Instead, they just beat up, call Republicans names and throw slurs and hope that carries the day.
Wade, well, thank you so much for joining us. We may have you back after the election, and we'll do a roundup about what's happened then.
That would be great.
And you're listening to Point of View. We're going to come back with Dr. Randall Price. This is going to be an interesting show, Charles, because Dr. Price is an archaeologist. He's been involved in the Holy Land a lot, and he's talking about the temple that needs to be rebuilt. And he's written on this extensively and has a lot of information on it. So stay with us, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Point of View.
It's called normalcy bias, and studies estimate around 70% of people suffer from it even after disaster strikes. Normalcy bias says even though things might look bad, somehow everything will continue as it always has. But in times of great threat, that assumption can be deadly. If freedom is to be preserved, people like you and I have to work just as hard as those who are trying to restrict religious freedom, those who reject the godly wisdom that brought us liberty. Point of View has been a beacon of truth for more than 45 years, but we dare not assume that will always be the case. Be the fire in our beacon today. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Take a few moments right now and visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Be among those who see the threat and take action. Be a beacon of truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And with me in studio is Charles Stolfus. He's one of the executive pastors at Denton Bible Church, a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary, and we're going to be talking to somebody else who's a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary. Our guest for this hour is Dr. Randall Price. Dr. Price has been involved heavily in the issue of archaeology, what's happening in Jerusalem. He did his Master's of Divinity or Master's of Theology at Dallas Theological Seminary, and then went to the University of Texas at Austin and did a PhD in Old Testament and Semitic studies. He has been involved in looking at what's happening in the Middle East for a number of years. He's an expert. He's written a number of books on this. And in 1993, he founded the World of Bible Ministries, where he writes and explains things that are going, takes groups over to Israel. Dr. Price, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Merrill. Good to be with you, and Charles, too.
Well, thank you so much. Let's start out. You have got an extensive background in Hebraic studies, Old Testament, archaeology, and other things. Just kind of walk us through some of the things you have done with your books. You've published a number of books, and you take people on trips to Israel. You do archaeological excavations even to this day, I believe.
Yes, I do. When my family and I moved to Jerusalem, where I studied at the Hebrew University, that was after my studies at Dallas Seminary, I became acquainted with a lot of archaeological work and also with the subject of the temple, which was kind of at the center of biblical studies in the center of Jerusalem where I was living. And that led me to do research, and I've written 5 books on the temple, both in the past, present, and the future aspects. And then the last 25 years I've been involved in archaeological excavation. For 10 years, I was director of excavations at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. And the last several years, I've been involved as co-director of the Qumran Cave Excavation Project, which we're looking for new Dead Sea Scrolls that may still be hidden in those caves. So that's been kind of my pursuit, as well as publishing and speaking around the country.
Well, one of the things you've actually achieved some notoriety on is the issue of the temple and the whether or not the temple will be or needs to be rebuilt. Interestingly, I think this isn't widely known, is that even though evangelicals are interested in this issue, there's some of the Orthodox Jewish community that's been involved in this as well, and they're interested in trying to be ready should they be able to rebuild the temple, to have the material and so forth. So start out with a little bit about what the Bible says about the temple and why that is even an issue today.
Well, I think we have to start with the understanding that the Bible, as it was given to us, was given to a people in a land with very literal concerns. And God made his promises based on the literal fulfillment of what he said in that land. So when we talk about the temple, we're talking about the first temple built by Solomon, the second temple that was built by Zerubbabel and then enlarged by Herod the Great. And those temples stood as a place where God revealed himself, brought his presence to earth, in which he regulated Israel's own calendar and worship, and which became a focal point for the people's prayers from then on. And so it's a very central concern in the Bible. Now, as we look at what happened with Israel, we see that they, as a nation on a national scale, rejected Jesus as their Messiah. As a result, it says their house has been left to them desolate, meaning the Temple Mount, and by extension, really the whole national identity in the country. But it also said in that passage in Matthew 23 that would be until they said, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And that held out for them a future in which God would restore Israel just as he had promised in the Old Testament, which we see also in a promise in Acts chapter 1 and verse 6 and 7, when even after the resurrection, the disciples said he was going to restore the kingdom to Israel now. And Jesus' reply was not that he would not do it, but he would not do it now. He had an interim plan, which was the church, and that at the end of that time, God would determine the time for the restoration. So with that restoration was everything that the Old Testament had promised, literally, and that would be a revival of Israel's rule. Instead of being dominated by the nations, it would be at the head of the nations. Their Messiah, Jesus Christ, would come and take up physical rule over the earth, that the temple would be rebuilt because you would have sinful people living in this time of what we call the kingdom or the millennial period, and they would need to be regulated with Christ or God's presence on earth, just as they were when that presence was there in the Old Testament times. So a temple and a priesthood functioning in that time would be quite necessary. Now, I say all this is part of the literal fulfillment because there are many who don't read the Old Testament that way. They take the New Testament and statements about Christ's fulfillment of certain things and read it back to reinterpret the Old Testament in a symbolic way. And therefore they make irrelevant and really improper any kind of future interpretation of the rebuilding of the temple. I don't take that position. I'm sure Charles and others don't either, because we were taught to be consistent in our literal interpretation of the Bible, to read it forward, not backwards, and to understand that when Christ came to fulfill things, he came to fulfill them as they were given, not to cancel or replace or change them in some way.
So the desire is to bring back the temple. There are Jews who are working to do that. There are Christians who are hoping that happens. I've been to Jerusalem. Charles has been to Jerusalem several times. We've been on the Temple Mount. You see the Dome of the Rock sitting right there on top of that thing, but there are discussions as to whether or not is that the right place? Is that where the temple sat, or is there some other place on the Temple Mount, or maybe even some other place beside that? So give that some thought. We're going to come back in just a minute to raise that, and I'd like you to discuss a little bit about where the Temple Mount is or should be, and if what's stopping us from rebuilding the temple. Not us, but the Jews from rebuilding the temple now. If you're interested, you can call us at 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be taking your calls later on in the hour if you're interested in talking with Dr. Price. If you go to pointofview.net and you click on today's show, you'll see Dr. Price's biography there. There's several links to books that he has written. You can find out more information about him, what he's done, and even order some of the books that he has done. I suspect we'll be touching on several of those. He has been prolific in his writing on archaeology, the temple treasures, the temple, Bible prophecy, and other aspects of that. So it'll be a great source for you to be able to go to the website, pointofview.net, click on today's show. This is Merrill Matthews, and we'll be back in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A number of columnists and political thinkers have tried to explain why there is so much hate in the public arena. Shelby Steele is a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He has some profound insights on why the left is consumed with hate. He takes us back to the 1960s when this country finally accepted that slavery and segregation were profound moral failings. So the left put itself in charge of righting this wrong, thus giving it enormous political and cultural power. It also led to the greatest array of government-sponsored social programs in history that have cost more than $22 trillion. He believes that this amounted to a formula for power that goes something like this. The greater the menace to the nation's moral legitimacy, the more power redounded to the left. Soon they had compiled a laundry list of menaces. Racism was at the top of the list, but other bigotry ending in ism and phobia were also making the list. This has created a problem for the left. America has made significant progress in racial issues along with progress with many other issues, and this threatens the left, whose existence is threatened by the diminishment of racial oppression. It must find racism anywhere it can in order to make itself relevant. The white-on-black shooting in Ferguson, Missouri got lots of media attention and even a comment from the President of the United States. During that same period, thousands of black-on-black shootings took place in Chicago, hometown of the then president, yet they inspired very little media coverage and no serious presidential commentary. Today, the left is troubled by its possible obsolescence. There is not enough social menace to service its need for power. It's easy to see why the left is consumed with hate. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hello, I'm O.S. Hawkins, and what a privilege it is to say these few brief words about how much I love Kirby Anderson and how much I respect the ministry of Point of View. What I love about Point of View is it confronts our culture every day as Kirby speaks the truth and speaks it in love. So I want to encourage you to support Point of View and thanking God for the gift He's given all of us in Kirby Anderson, who leads with integrity and excellence.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And we're back with Merrill Matthews from the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And our guest this hour is Dr. Randall Price, expert on the Old Testament, graduate in Hebrew Studies from University of Texas at Austin, founded the World of the Bible Ministries, where he is president, and he travels to Jerusalem, writes on it a lot, and he's also an archaeologist. So, Dr. Price, if the temple needs to be rebuilt, what's stopping us from rebuilding the temple now?
Well, of course, there's different answers. The political answer would be that there's no basis for negotiation, either to share the site or to have one group claim dominance over another. The Islamic authorities who have had the site for the last 1,400 years, and even after 1967, when Israel became sovereign over the area, they retained their jurisdiction of the site. Mm-hmm. They claim that no temple ever existed, that it's a fabrication of history, that the Jewish people only came to the land in the 1800s, and that they've invented these views about the historic temple to Judaize Jerusalem and to take over the site from them. So on a political basis, we just have continued controversy and conflict at the site of the Temple Mount, because Jews who are Orthodox and believe they should have access to the site and should be able to pray at the site are banned from the site. Even Christians who try to go there, carry a Bible, or say something about the temple, are removed from the site. It's become I would say, probably the most conflicted area in the whole Middle East conflict, with any basis for resolution. From a biblical point of view, we realize there are things that have to happen before a temple can stand again. There is, from a consistent view of biblical prophecy, the next event would be the rapture of the church, followed by a time we call the tribulation period. And in that time, we read that a temple will stand, that it will be a place, again, of controversy, and it will be a place where the Antichrist, who exists in that time period, usurps the place of God in the temple and uses as the basis for then persecuting the Jewish people. And as a result of that very act of desecration, Christ returns at the end of that period to put down his rule, establish his everlasting kingdom. And then in that time, a future temple would be built. So all of these things require certain events mentioned in the Bible. But of course, the political situation at present prevents anything from taking place, even though Orthodox Jews and a number of Christian Zionists would like to see that happen.
Now, of course, many Christians are anticipating someday when a temple will be reconstructed, of course, following the rapture, like you suggest, and maybe even another one in the millennial kingdom. But many Jews are also anticipating the establishing of a building of a temple there. I know you are familiar with the Temple Institute, founded by Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, and how you can go today and actually visit the Temple Institute and find many of the implements that they've constructed in anticipation of reestablishing worship in a temple on the Temple Mount. Even priests practicing their duties as prescribed in the Old Testament law, a sacrificial altar that has been created. And so could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, Rabbi Israel Ariel and Rabbi Chaim Richmond, who both were, shall we say, founders and directors of the Temple Institute, as well as others like the Temple Mount Faithful with drew blank on the name, but Gershon Solomon. These groups were originally motivated by the teachings of Rabbi Kook, and his view as an Orthodox Jew was that God would not act to restore the Messianic age until Jews at present saw the vision and repented in some way, took action to reverse the condition of the diaspora or the way things were. And so for them, they believed that if they could simply get the temple rebuilt, that Messiah would come, crown their efforts, and the restoration that was promised would occur. So for them, establishing a organization to begin making implements for the temple, and some taking more demonstrative action by public demonstrations to call for the rebuilding of the temple, was what they felt was needed. They've been somewhat disappointed that the Israeli public has not come more their direction, but there's been more of a change with the Islamic intransigence on the Temple Mount and the way things have happened. So even secular Jews today probably feel that the temple as a national monument ought to appear. This is the reason why they have made the efforts they've made, because of their theological conviction that unless they act, God won't act.
Dr. Price, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212, if you want to talk to Dr. Price about the temple and the possible rebuilding of it. Does the Dome of the Rock have to come down in order to be able to build the temple?
Well, again, this goes back to our question of the location of the temple. I would say that all of the archaeologists I know, and I know all the prominent ones in Israel as well as other places, especially evangelicals who have a commitment to what the biblical text says, all of them would say that the central location, which is the place where the Dome of the Rock is today, is most likely the location. And for that reason, you'd have to have that building removed and replaced by the temple, because the Dome of the Rock is a pagan structure. The practices to go on there are pagan worship, and that would desecrate the site. So it has to be, all those buildings and even the Islamic presence has to be removed, the area properly ritually cleansed, and then the building take place. So yes, that would have to happen, which of course is why it hasn't happened, because of the political situation today.
Presumably, we would get a war if Israel tried to do something like that.
Well, they call it, the Third World War. According to one of the Muslim muftis that I spoke with personally, he said that, the first move in this direction, the entire Islamic world as one would rise up, and overflow Israel and not spare one drop of blood in defending the site. Now, we've had different things like this happen progressively. Exercise sovereignty over the site in 1967, as we've had Jewish Orthodox making, as they've seen the Temple Institute build is to be used in a future temple, and the Islamic world is not joined in as a whole. So it may be more of a hollow threat, but that is what is threatened.
Dr. Price, some listeners might be wondering, what's the big deal about that location in particular? Couldn't it be just to the side of the dome or something like that? Could you speak of the biblical significance of that location, going back even as far as, let's say, the time when Abraham offered up his son on top of Mount Moriah, the significance of that location?
We've got about a minute, Dr. Price.
Okay, real quick. Abraham offered his son on Mount Moriah. When we come to Exodus 15, it says that Moses was instructed to plant them in the mountain of his inheritance. That ended up being Jerusalem. And when David came to the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, he connected these pieces as well. And the book of Chronicles, it says that Solomon began to build the temple on Mount Moriah, where the angel appeared to David, where the threshing floor of Ornan was. So we have this. When that location was established, even though the first temple was destroyed, the second temple had to be built exactly in the same location. Ezra chapter 2 and verse 68 and Ezra 9:9 are both passages that talk about that you have to restore the temple on its foundation, because the presence of God was once there in that temple. When it left, it's going to return to the same place. So there cannot be another location for the temple except its original location.
1-800-351-1212. If you want to talk to Dr. Price, give us a call. We'll be back in just a minute.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And we're back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Policy Innovation, and with me in studio is Charles Stolfus of Denton Bible Church, one of the pastors there, executive pastors. And on the line with us is Dr. Randall Price, who has just been one of the country's leaders in looking at Old Testament prophecy, how that affects Jerusalem and the temple specifically.
Dr. Price, I know you've done a lot of work in placing the temple in a broader biblical context. And as I've read some of your writings, you've even started as early as the Garden of Eden, what Adam and Eve forfeited by their sin, that God initially was tabernacling, in a sense, among his people. But then you go all through the rest of the scripture to the end, and the eternal state is God tabernacling among his people. Could you speak a little bit about that broader biblical context for the temple?
Well, I think when we look at the idea of God's intention was to be with his people. He created us in his image. He created us for himself. And so at the beginning, we see this happening, and we see God's presence in the garden with them. It says he walked with them in the cool of the evening. That presence had to be interrupted because of the sin of man, and that is restored when we come to Mount Sinai, when God says in Exodus 25:8, let them make for me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. So the whole purpose and concept of the temple was to allow God's holy presence to be in the midst of unholy people. And that's why it was regulated the way it was, and why there had to be a priesthood, and why this whole concept of ritual purity was so important, because it was a means by which man's sin would be able to coexist with God, and God would not have to remove his presence from man. When we come to the whole concept of God coming down as a Messiah, it tells us in John 1:14 that the Word was made flesh and tabernacled among us. And it actually uses the same Greek transliteration of the Hebrew term that was used for God's dwelling, God's dwelling place. So in that sense, he had a means of being with sinful man, because he could coexist, and yet he was a sinless man in the midst of sinful man, and we saw how that resulted in his going to the cross, which, of course, was the means of removing the penalty of sin from us. But it moves us toward the final picture in which God has determined that his people will see his face, they will know him in a personal way, they will dwell in the New Jerusalem. And when we come to that place, it tells us that John said, I saw no temple there. But it adds, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. And so I see that because of other passages talking about the heavenly temple, which you read about in the Old Testament, in Exodus 25, and many places, and also in the New Testament, telling us that the things in the tabernacle and temple on earth were copies of the things in heaven. So there is a heavenly temple. But in the New Jerusalem, there is not a heavenly temple, because I think the New Jerusalem is actually the Holy of Holies in that heavenly temple that has been detached and is the place where we will dwell with the Lord. And so when Jesus said in John 14, I go to prepare a place for you, I come to get you and take you back to that place. My Father's house are many dwelling places. I think this is the concept that he has in mind, that we will dwell with the Lord forever in that holy state. And so the temple throughout time simply is a picture of how God is trying to realize that, given the conditions we have in the fall, and how ultimately the restoration of Eden will take place in the New Jerusalem.
1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk to Dr. Price, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Price, you've been heavily involved in archaeology. I think you've sponsored digs in Jerusalem and in Israel. we know a lot about the Bible from archaeology, though you hear people, skeptics occasionally say, there's really not any real archaeological evidence to defend David, the house of David, Solomon, the temple, and so forth. What are some of the findings, the chief findings in archaeology that confirm what the Bible says?
Well, let me just say, I'll take what you just mentioned. That is the case of an early Israel. Was there an Israel in the 10th century BC, the time the Bible indicates that David established a united monarchy and Solomon built the temple? Up until probably the 1990s, we didn't have much of real archaeological evidence to that because Jerusalem is buried under thousands of years of destruction and then rebuilding, and today we have a modern city covering most of that area. It makes it impossible to do excavation there. But in 1993, they discovered the name of David in a stele at a place called Tel Dan that makes it clear that there was a house of David, and therefore there had to be a David to have a house.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a stele made by an enemy of Israel 150 years after David's own life, which confirms that it was recognized historically at the time. And then in, let's say, around 2005, excavations began at a site called Khirbet Keyefa, which was biblical Shemayim, which means a two-gated city. And there we have a Judean city on the outskirts of the whole area, actually guarded the border with the Philistine territories, right in the area where David slew Goliath, the Valley of Elah. And in excavations there by Yossi Garfinkel over probably 5-6 year period of time, they uncovered very clear evidence of a 10th century presence, both in terms of the politics, because there was a temple or a palace there, not a temple but a palace. From the time of David, there was an archive with early writing, even included the name of one of Saul's sons, Ishbaal. There was a number of features, fortification features and others that showed that this little town on the outskirts had every evidence of empire. And if that was true of such a small city on the outskirts, what must the capital city, Jerusalem, have been like? And so now, and there's other sites now that have come to light in this area that have demonstrated, from carbon dating of seeds and things found there to the type of pottery to all kind of things that show that there was clearly, and even in the time of Saul, the 11th century and going into the 10th century, there was a kingdom of Israel. So many of those early criticisms have been put down by recent archaeology.
Dr. Price, let's go to Randy and see if we can get his question in before our break. Randy, you're on the air.
Thanks for taking my call. Dr. Price, a lot of people look toward the reconstruction of a temple in Judaism as a sign of the imminent return of the Lord sometime down the road. Would the temporary structure of a temple suffice in a scriptural fulfillment, such as what was done in the Old Testament before a temple was built? In other words, could a temporary structure and the temple sacrifices be done in a temporary structure, and would that be a fulfillment of the scripture that people are looking for in that context?
Interesting question. Dr. Price.
Yeah, the answer is yes. All that was necessary when the second temple was built by Zerubbabel was an altar deconstructed and they start the sacrificial system. It's still another 15 years before they finished the construction of the temple itself. And so if you could gain political access and dominance of the site, build an altar, start the sacrificial system, you wouldn't have to have an actual building built.
Randy, want to follow up on that? Okay, good.
I don't think so. I think that just tells us that we don't have to start looking for them to build a temple before the imminent return of the Lord. So
it's an interesting question because doing a temporary would be fairly quick, would it not, Dr. Price, especially if they have the implements ready?
It's true, but everybody who wants to rebuild a temple in Judaism today, their first step would be to do the altar. But they said if we have control of the site and can purify the site, there's no reason we can't rebuild the entire temple. And they have blueprints, and they say within 6 months they get up a functioning temple up. So I'm not sure that that would be necessary. They would just build the altar, get started, and then build the rest.
Thank you, Randy. Interesting question. Well, this is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. If you want to talk to Dr. Price, 1-800-351-1212. 800-351-1212. We've got one segment left to talk to him, and we'd like to go and find out about what the World of the Bible Ministries when we come back. Dr. Price, tell us about the World of the Bible Ministries and what you're involved in these days. You travel a lot. I know you take tours to Israel. You publish a number of books, and so we want to make sure that people know where they can go to find out more about World of the Bible Ministries, what you're doing, and books that they can get access to. So stay with us, 1-800-351-1212 if you want to join us for our last segment and ask a question of Dr. Price. We'll be back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Riley Bembry returned from World War I, a changed man. Upon his return, this former Army medic settled in Los Angeles and became a butcher. But the city could not contain him, and he headed into the Mojave Desert and became a prospector. By the time the Great Depression gripped the nation, other veterans of the Great War had found their way to Bembry's cabin, each seeking to escape the emotional and physical scars left from the war. Together in 1934, they erected a simple 7-foot monument atop a rocky outcropping not far from Bembry's cabin, but miles and miles from anything else. They chose a common symbol to honor war dead, a white cross, and dedicated it to honor the dead of all wars. When Bembry died in 1984, Henry Sandoz, Bembry's close friend, began to care for the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial Cross. In 2001, someone sued. A judge would eventually order the memorial hidden from view, literally covered with a padlocked bag, while the case was decided. First Liberty had the privilege of working with Henry Sandoz, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and others to defend that memorial. Before he was senator, Ted Cruz volunteered his time as lead counsel on the case. Because of Henry Sandoz, Ted Cruz, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and First Liberty, that memorial still stands today just where Bembry placed it in honor of the dead of all wars. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Point of View is actually a lifeline for me, and I'm actually a third-generation Point of View listener. I homeschool my girls, and I don't think I could do what I do without Point of View on a daily basis. Without ministries like Point of View, we really don't have much hope for the future of our children, our grandchildren. They just really help on a daily basis protect the freedoms that we enjoy today. I can't see a better way to invest in our future than to support Point of View.
I really appreciate everything that you do. in keeping us informed.
Point of View. Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And we're back. Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews for our last segment with Dr. Randall Price, Old Testament expert and president of the World of the Bible Ministries. And we're going to go to Charles here, Randall.
Dr. Price, not too long ago, I picked up your Guide to the Temple that's published by Rose Publishing, and I have to say it is really an extraordinary work. There's a wealth of information there, really well organized, some extraordinary graphics that really help a reader to really understand the wealth of a biblical focus on the temple. So really kudos for that. In terms of the temple, biblically speaking, there are several temples. You've already talked about them. The first temple under Solomon, and then that gets destroyed by the Babylonians, and then there's the second temple under Zerubbabel. But then you've spoken of a future temple, and I'm wondering, are there two future temples to come? It seems like the tribulation speaks of a temple functioning, and then the millennium in the book of Ezekiel seems to speak of a temple. Are they the same or different?
No, they are different. When we come to passages like Daniel 9:27 or 2 Thessalonians 2:4, even Matthew chapter 24:15, these are all passages in which Daniel's prophecy spoke of the desecration of the temple by the Antichrist. And then Jesus in Matthew 24 looks back on that event, but he projects toward the future. He says, when you read about this that was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then it talks about that Jews in that future day are to flee because there will be a great tribulation. And then we read about in Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, how that area where it's been given to the nations will be separated from the place of the temple that will have been rebuilt at that point, because it will be usurped by the Antichrist. And so this is a number of passages the New Testament builds upon, and Paul himself in 2 Thessalonians 2:4 says that this man of sin is going to seat himself in the temple of God, make himself out to be God. None of that has happened in past history. You can't find those details. You can't justify it. It's all looking toward a future time when the tribulation happens. But beyond that, when Christ returns, we have 9 chapters in the book of Ezekiel, the last chapters, 40 through 48, which detail the rebuilding of a temple which is significantly larger, not the temple itself, but the whole temple complex, 30 times larger than it has been in the past, elevated as well with a lot of topographical changes. And then it talks about a condition of peace. Even Isaiah 2 through 4 talk about Jerusalem being exalted, the Temple Mount being exalted, all the nations coming to it, and there being a time in which no war exists, and the Messiah is arbiter of all of the decisions made on earth. So we see these kind of things throughout the Old Testament, and that projects to that future kingdom which Christ will establish and rule over for 1,000 years. So at that time, the temple will be prominent. It'll be the place of his rule over the earth.
Dr. Price, you started World of the Bible Ministries about 25 years ago. Tell us what World of the Bible Ministries does.
Well, our goal is to bring the world of the Bible to the word of the church. We do that through talking about the past, present, and prophetic world of the Bible, because the world of the Bible is the context for the word of the Bible. So whenever we read the Bible, we're automatically going back to even ancient times, and we have to get the text and interpret it correctly in those times in order to export it to the 21st century where we live. So we've made a point of trying to deal with the past. That's archaeological information. It involves archaeological excavations, as well as writing, reporting on that. It deals with the present conflicted Middle East conflict, which I've written books on and still make comments on. And then the future, which is the prophetic focus of the Bible when all the fulfillment that it promises will take place. So a lot of books and materials on prophecy. And at the website, you can download free information. There's lots of articles and things there. On YouTube, we have a special channel which takes you to the present day. Gives you, there's probably 60 or 70 small little videos talking about a tour of the land and how that's done and connecting with life lessons. There are a lot of things in our resource catalog in terms of a lot of things related to the topic we have today. So there's a great deal there, and we also keep people up on daily news. So worldofthebible.com. If they will go to worldofthebible.com, it should satisfy a lot of people's information.
You can go to worldofthebible.com, or you can go to pointofview.net on our Today Show, and then we have a link to that on Point of View. You also sponsor tours of Israel, I believe, and even archaeological excavations, don't you?
We do. We've done 108 tours.
108?
And, yes, so I've been busy. We do several a year, but people can schedule those either as a church wanting to come to us, because we have a tour company called World of the Bible Tours, or we also offer our own annual basic tour for people, and sometimes second-timers and third-timer tours, a little more extensive. The archaeological excavations are done allowing for volunteers to come and work beside us as we do our digs in the land of the Bible. So that at present deals with finding caves at Qumran and looking for remains in those caves. We've done 2 so far. We have 2 more we're going to be excavating this January.
Well, it's amazing. Now, when is your next tour coming up?
Next tour is going to be in June, and they can go to our website and download a full brochure about that tour. That's to Israel. There's also an optional tour to Greece, which takes them to all the key places in Greece, and a cruise involved, and they're going to Patmos and Ephesus and all these types.
Do all of the tours of Israel involve archaeological digs also, or are they 2 separate tours?
No, they do, and they don't. Well, they don't participate in archaeological dig, but I do a lot of off the beaten path trips. So because that's my area of expertise, we visit active archaeological sites and talk to directors and things during our tours. But the archaeological digs in which people can participate are separate.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's been very enlightening and very, very interesting. We don't hear this much, Charles. It's a very instructive discussion. So thank you so much for joining us. And those of you who are interested, you can go to pointofview.net, click on the Today Show, and you'll be able to find more about Dr. Price there, the books that he has, and other things. Now, when we come back in the next hour, Charles, we're going to... It's been an amazing couple of weeks, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think we can speak of chaos in the Capitol.
And mob rule.
Yes.
One person on CNN got in trouble for calling the attack on Senator Cruz a mob, but I think he was absolutely right. It was at least a mini mob.
Yes, absolutely. And I think President Trump called it the same.
He did call it the same. So if you stay with us, we're going to be back in a few minutes and talk about some of the incidents that have been happening in these past few weeks. We want to give you a chance to call in and weigh in on that, provide your thoughts about what's happening in the country and the changes that we're seeing now. So 1-800-351-1212, and we will be back in just a few minutes.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And we've already had 2 hours today. Very interesting stuff. In studio with me, Charles Stolfus. He's one of the executive pastors of Denton Bible Church. And we just finished an hour segment with Dr. Randall Price talking about the temple in Jerusalem and the efforts to rebuild that. The fact that there's a group of Jewish people, Orthodox Jews, who have been developing the implements for the temple, and they are waiting for the opportunity to rebuild that temple. But in this hour, we wanted to turn to you because we have had an interesting few weeks here, and we wanted to give you a chance to weigh in. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212 if you want to call. Charles, I don't know when I've seen something like this. We had the Brett Kavanaugh. He gave his initial hearings. We thought, okay, that worked out fine. He did a good job on that, and thought it was over, but it wasn't over because Dr. Christine Ford came up and said, I remember some things back when we were in high school, and raised some questions about that. Democrats said, we've got to have a hearing on that. So Republicans had a hearing on it. Dr. Ford gave her side of the story. They brought Brett Kavanaugh in. It was a very emotional thing. Dr. Ford's was I think an emotional and moving testimony there. She clearly believes something happens there, and it's very clear in her mind that something did happen. Brett Kavanaugh came in, Judge Kavanaugh, and equally as forcefully refuted the arguments, gave a spirited rebuttal of that, and then it just got worse. We had to have an extra FBI investigation in this, even though it already had 6, I believe, at the time. What do you make of all these things that are going? And what was really interesting, that was just one part of it, but the swarms of people who descended on Washington. ACLU was actually paying people from Alaska, paying their travel expenses to go from Alaska to Washington to be able to try to discuss with Senator Murkowski, try to get her to vote no on Brett Kavanaugh. You had a number of groups, according to an article in the Wall Street Journal, sponsored by George Soros, funded by them, paying for people's expenses to come and try to protest and create a certain amount of chaos. And the media was involved in this. What did you make of all this?
Well, I don't know what to make out of it. It's so chaotic, and it really was something like a mob that had descended upon the Capitol. I mean, from the very beginning of the hearing, we have the Democrats on the judiciary. I mean, within seconds of Senator Grassley opening up the hearing, they interrupted multiple times with really nothing substantive other than just simply charges. This is not fair. This is illegitimate. And so it really went downhill from there.
It absolutely did. They had the security in there to take those people out, but there are allegations, and I think Chuck Schumer even may have hinted at it, that some of this was actually orchestrated by Democrats to do that, to have these various people in here protesting as soon as Brett Kavanaugh, and I thought he remained remarkably cool under this. And you know, when they went to the Christine Ford and Brett Kavanaugh's rebuttal, I was afraid they were going to let people come in there, but apparently they sort of screened that audience. But as soon as they would start, And I even saw people stand up and start saying, "No, you need to vote no on this," but they had their iPhone on filming them as they were being taken out.
Yeah, and I think really one of the things that really disturbed me is that it really wasn't about truth. It really wasn't about some objective assessment of were these allegations true with respect to Judge Kavanaugh. It was really kind of a partisan a series of accusations that really were in search of evidence but never found them. Even Dr. Ford's recollections of something that she says happened 37 years ago were absent any substantive support. Even the witnesses that she said were there that witnessed these alleged events denied it or said they don't know anything about it. So that was what would disturb me.
1-800-351-1212 if you want to weigh in on the events of this past week. You know, one of the amazing things to me is this narrative that emerged that you have to believe survivors. And I published a piece in The Hill, it's available at thehill.com, where I went through what's called the Innocence Project. And the Innocence Project's been around since 1993, I believe it was, 92, 93. And they find cases where people have been convicted of murder, rape, assault, a whole range of things. And they come back and they pay for the DNA evidence, if there's some DNA around. And they have cleared more than 300 people over this time. Some who have been in jail 20, 30, and one I noticed nearly 40 years, convicted of various allegations, in which, in these cases, because in the piece I wrote, I highlighted all sexual assault allegations. In one case, the woman knew the people that she accused. She knew them, but yet she accused them of kidnapping her by knife point, taking her into a car, sexually assaulting her. There was no evidence other than her testimony. And then there was some DNA, but they didn't process that. And then here, nearly 40 years later, actually this was a 2002, so this is 18 years later, so 16 years later, they come up and the Innocence Project brings in the DNA evidence. They find out the men that were in jail were not guilty, and once they went and presented that to her, her story started falling apart, and she just finally admitted that she made up the whole thing. And she had said she was 100% sure that these were the men who did this.
Yeah, and that causes us to hear Dr. Ford's assertions that she is 100% certain that it was Judge Kavanaugh that did this in a different light, because memory is notoriously unreliable. I read an article in the last couple of weeks also from the National Science Foundation that said a wealth of research from psychologists indicates that memory is notoriously unreliable, especially with the passage of time, that people remember and then misremember, and then they add in unwittingly elements of information from what they saw on TV or what they experienced in life. And even a traumatic event associated with the memory doesn't necessarily sear it into one's mind in an unchangeable way, that it changes with the passage of time.
You know, I find as I get older, I misremember a lot of things.
Yes.
And my wife is always there to tell me about the things I'm misremembering, because it does happen. Well, we're going to be back in just a few minutes. We've got calls coming in. Rhonda, we've got you on the line, and we will come back to you after we do the break. We're talking about what's happened these past few weeks and what that means for the electoral process, because, you know, Charles, when I was watching this, Democrats, you have opened a door with these protests and trying to coordinate these things. When the day comes, and I suspect the day will come when there's going to be a Democrat in the White House and Democrats control the Senate at some point in the future, others are going to feel perfectly empowered to go and do exactly this because you've opened that door. And it's just a sorry scene. I hate to see it. 1-800-351-1212. We've got calls on the line. We'll get to you as soon as we get back from the break. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back in a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A number of columnists and political thinkers have tried to explain why there is so much hate in the public arena. Shelby Steele is a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He has some profound insights on why the left is consumed with hate. He takes us back to the 1960s when this country finally accepted that slavery and segregation were profound moral failings. So the left put itself in charge of righting this wrong, thus giving it enormous political and cultural power. It also led to the greatest array of government-sponsored social programs in history that have cost more than $22 trillion. He believes that this amounted to a formula for power that goes something like this. The greater the menace to the nation's moral legitimacy, the more power redounded to the left. Soon they had compiled a laundry list of menaces. Racism was at the top of the list, but other bigotry ending in ism and phobia were also making the list. This has created a problem for the left. America has made significant progress in racial issues along with progress with many other issues, and this threatens the left, whose existence is threatened by the diminishment of racial oppression. It must find racism anywhere it can in order to make itself relevant. The white-on-black shooting in Ferguson, Missouri got lots of media attention and even a comment from the President of the United States. During that same period, thousands of black-on-black shootings took place in Chicago, hometown of the then president, yet they inspired very little media coverage and no serious presidential commentary. Today, the left is troubled by its possible obsolescence. There is not enough social menace to service its need for power. It's easy to see why the left is consumed with hate. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth. Michael Youssef.
I tell you, I always look forward to being with you, Kirby. You truly give me a good intellectual challenge. In any way that you are gifted, what God called you to do, as long as you are involved in some way, and that is the plea I have with your listeners, Kirby, that please do not just listen to a program like this and then go, so well, that was an interesting thing. No, I want to challenge you. Get involved. Find out what Kirby Anderson is doing. Find out what other ministries are doing. Get involved, because it is only when the believers really take their faith seriously that can we turn the world upside down. I believe that with all my heart.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And we're back. It's Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and we're taking your calls right now about the past few weeks, the Kavanaugh hearings, what we saw in Washington, and just the chaos that's been going on. 1-800-351-1212. Give us a call, and we're going to start out with Rhonda in Illinois. Rhonda, you're on the air.
Well, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to say that on this mob bit with them yelling, that was always a battle cry. You know, in the olden days, whenever they'd fight, there's a battle cry, get you all hyped up. Even at Jericho, they walked around Jericho quietly and then yelled before the walls fell down. And these people's rights end where my rights begin.
Did you notice they went up to the Supreme Court and yelled and none of the doors fell down there?
Yes. Yes, well, they wanted to go in there and fight, didn't they? They wanted to get him out.
All right, Rhonda, you are a woman, and what they wanted to the scenario they were trying to make here is that this is somehow the dismissing women's and their concerns. What's your response to that?
Well, I think women who follow them are nuts too, because a woman's place is in the home. We should follow the Lord and do the Lord's work and raising our families and being good wives and not be out on the street and yelling in people's face. That's just not correct, according to the Lord.
Yeah, and wouldn't it seem to be somewhat demeaning to a woman to simply say that you have to believe someone absent any corroborative evidence whatsoever?
Oh, it sure is. It sure is demeaning. And I just can't imagine a person putting themselves in that predicament, except that they've been trained as young people, and I kind of blame it on schools.
Rhonda, I've seen a number of tweets from women who've said, we're concerned that if we don't push back against this, our husbands, our sons, our brothers, and others could end up being subject to the accusations which were false. Do you have that same concern?
Yes, I do. I agree with that. And I'd hate to see my husband get put in a place like that at work and so on, because every time I hear something about a woman on a job and they've accused some man, even the school teachers, I hate to hear that, because I think, is that true? Are they just trying to get even with somebody?
Do you think that by confirming Kavanaugh that Republicans have hurt their chances with women?
Oh, no, I think it's great. I think they should look at what he believes. He believes the Constitution and wants our country to be the way it should. Not like Hillary comments with no civility. She's describing herself.
Well, thank you, Rhonda. Let's go to Ross in North Carolina. Ross.
Hello,
there,
sir.
Ross, there. Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I thank you very much. This is very deep, intriguing, and spiritual. People won't believe that, but this is a very spiritual conversation to be had. Not to slight anything from the woman's objective, because I believe every voice should be heard. But the example that I want to give is we went through this learning process as a nation. The lynch mobs in the 1800s, I don't know if people even remember, Sacco and Vanzetti case in the early 1900s set the precedence for putting someone to death based on circumstantial evidence. And that's all this was. The voices that were trying to be heard are launching out in fear of losing what they want to take advantage of. They're not really looking at what the Constitution has to say. So we have, as a nation, got to be very careful at what we're doing to destroy the true Constitution just for our own personal benefit.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, and that it's not unusual that we would have partisanship on hearings like this. This is actually the rule. It seems to have become the rule. But what seems to be different about this recent hearing was almost the complete breakdown of objectivity. The assertion that, just proof by assertion. If you say it loud enough or forcefully enough, that substitutes for actual evidence.
Wasn't that amazing?
You're guilty before you're guilty before proven innocent.
Yes,
is what you get. That I don't care which side you're on. Be very careful of where you're going with that.
Yes, and we have a long tradition of objectivity and the need for due process that goes way back to even the Magna Carta. Buddy, I know you're familiar with that, the English common law that we inherited here in America. But the complete willingness to just give up on this issue of fairness and the presumption of innocence and this idea of due process of law.
1-800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. Ross, what do you make of this? I mean, people felt like, if, going back to the point that Charles made, if I just say it louder, if I say it with tears, you have to believe me rather than evidence. It was just, I don't even know what to do with this.
Well, the same group of people were also protesting for the people that wanted to persecute O.J. Simpson, because everyone believed that he was guilty, and everyone was guilty, but all the liberal side said, no, due process of the law, and he was found innocent based on circumstantial evidence, and then found guilty in a lower court. Whether you like it or not, that's our justice system.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes guilty will get to go free, but if we break down the basic law, and that's what they're trying to do, not just our legal system, they're trying to break down the law of God in the family, and they're using it. This is only the stepping stone. That's why I say be very careful of what we're becoming as a world, never mind as a nation.
Thank you so much, Ross, for calling in. All right, let's go to Steve in Maine. I thought he was finished on that. Steve.
Hi, how you doing? Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
I just wanted to make a comment on the memory issue that was brought up. That yes, in some cases our memory doesn't serve us well, especially with the passage of time. But I know from personal experience on issues like this, you will not forget that person's name, their face, the location. So we got to be careful with statements like that because our enemies will use it against us. I agree that sometimes there may be cases where our memory doesn't serve us well in details. What were they wearing or something like that? But I just think we need to be careful with the way we go forward in stating things that would support our belief.
Well, and Steve, I would agree with that we need to be careful about that. But there's just simply an overwhelming amount of evidence that says that even sincerely held beliefs can be misremembered and can be contrary to the evidence. And so we have to also be careful to evaluate claims that people make and look for and expect, under certain circumstances, some sort of corroboration. It may be that we never know ultimately what happened 37 years ago, but that may be where we are, and that we just simply cannot sustain a charge or an accusation against someone if it has zero corroboration. And that's the disturbing thing about what we had there. It's possible that Dr. Ford was telling the truth, but it's also possible that she's misremembering. Maybe something traumatic did in fact happen there. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was confused. We don't know. But we have to actually take, even the scripture says that we should not receive an accusation against an elder except upon the witness or testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And I think the reason for that is that people in public positions are subject to sometimes false accusations. So we also have to be careful there.
Thank you so much, Steve, for calling in. When we come back from the break, we're going to go to Rebecca in California. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. If you want to weigh in on the events of the past week in Kavanaugh. And this is Merrill Matthews at Point of View. We'll be back in just a minute.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. It's Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and we're talking about Kavanaugh and the chaos of the last 2 weeks. If you'd like to call in, 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212 if you want to share your thoughts or have questions. Charles Stolfus, executive pastor, one of the executive pastors at Denton Bible Church, is in the studio with me. And we're going to go now to Jeannie in California. Gazi, you're up next. Let's go to Jeannie. Jeannie, you're on the air.
Hi, how are you today?
Oh, well, I think we're doing all right. How are you?
I'm fine.
You're in California, right?
Yes, I'm in California.
No, Governor Brown has just signed new legislation. Are you going to be on a company board here soon?
No, sir. And I don't go. I'm not in agreement with anything that Governor Brown
well, you're one of the few Californians who haven't left the state yet.
I can't. We have too much family business here, sir.
Well, interesting. Okay. You wanted to talk about the Kavanaugh hearings?
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead.
I work in and around Silicon Valley, and I totally understand where Ms. Blasey Ford is from and at Stanford. And after watching her testimony, I am totally convinced that she was a prepared witness, and she lied. And she lied knowingly lied.
Well, it's interesting. Did you not, when she was talking, you could see her shaking and nervous, and a few times seemed to be on the verge of tears. That didn't persuade you it was legitimate, at least in her mind then?
Oh, absolutely no. That was just totally fake. Totally. That was
Yeah, and it seems like people were confusing the idea of credible with compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I could agree that she was compelling in her delivery, but I think, as you suggest, perhaps even deceptive. But I don't know. I could still say that she was compelling, but credible, that's a different idea, and I don't think there was any credibility to what she was saying.
Yes, I agree with that.
So you're not believing that at all then. So who do you think would have been behind her testimony then?
Fine.
Did you find it strange that this got leaked? And at least according to Dr. Ford, she didn't want her testimony leaked. Now, if she was a prepared witness, then maybe that was all sort of staged as well. But she seemed to be upset that that her testimony or that her concerns and letter was leaked by Feinstein's office. But you think that was on purpose then?
Oh yes, absolutely. That was all contrived. And also, she was involved in professionally preparing people to lie and get away with it on lie detector tests. And she also has been ultimately involved in hypnosis in order to carry that out. So I still believe she was a fully prepared witness, and she was put up by the Democrats to try to stop Judge Kavanaugh from being confirmed to the court, because so much was at stake for these crooked Democrat politicians who've been involved in so much that they're afraid that they're going to be exposed. And that's why it was so important to get rid of Judge Kavanaugh. And when they failed, now they're calling for the mob rule.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Jeannie, you make a good point there that for the left or the progressive left, the courts are really the means by which you implement something you can't get done through the democratic process. So this really is the whole ball game.
That has been their own ramp for decades now.
And they've been very successful in breaking down many traditional moral positions with the courts alone and not through the democratic process.
Thank you so much for calling, Jeannie. We appreciate your call. And now let's go to Gazi in California. Gazi, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yes, go right ahead.
Hi. Thank you for having me. How are you today?
I think we're all right. How about you?
Well, I'm a truck driver, and I drive 48 states, and the only thing I need to do is to listen to the radio, you know?
Uh-huh.
And actually, what is bringing this country down to the ground is the media and the politician and then the religious institution. And religious institution is, you know, is just on money base, you know, it's like fundraising. That's it. Have nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Have nothing to do with the Bible. Okay? I was raised as a Muslim, as a Christian, as a Jew in Jerusalem. And I witnessed what's, you know, been going in this country. I talked to the gentleman about my point that all these men being accused, and lately, what's his name, been sent to jail, Bill Cosby. All these men, you know, are accused and they are guilty, except this man.
Well, tell me, you think the media is bringing the country down too?
Yes, the media is the most, you know, I was hearing to one of this Mike, something, he's Republican. He called people in Seattle, the demonstrator, are animals. You know, sometimes I wish I said I want to have a sledgehammer and smash the radio. You know, I'm not Republican, I'm not Democratic, and those two parties are bringing this country down. We need a new faces. We need a new blood, okay? I don't say that this man molesting that woman, she's telling part of the truth and she's telling part of lies. But to me, my personal opinion, this man is not the right man to be in the court because the judge has to be calm, has to be, I know he has the right to defend himself. You know, they should give the FBI more time to investigate because it's important for this country, for our kids. I'm not yet citizen, and I'm planning to bring my kids to live here. But if I don't feel secure, if I don't feel there is justice, then I might leave myself, you know. But somebody maybe say to me, if you don't like it, you can get the hell out of here. Yes, I will get the hell out of here. We need a new what we call it, a new movement in this country to bring up this country away from Democrats and away from the Republican. You hear the radio that support or the media support the Republican, they say bad things about Democrats or the other way, you know. But to me, media bringing this country down, you know.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ghazi. It was an important point. He does not believe Kavanaugh. He thought there need to be more investigation of that, and that's certainly something that a number of people in the country thought as well. Let's go to Ann in Missouri. Ann, you're on the line.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Thank you. I think we're doing well.
Good. I just had a couple of comments. I told your screener one of them was that I'm reading some history on the War of 1812 and when President Monroe was in office. And one thing just jumped off the page at me when a newspaper man in that time period said, it is our job to mold the thinking of the people. And I thought, oh, my goodness, you know, how far back does this go? And have we ever had a break when, you know, Edward R. Murrow or someone like that, have we ever had a break when people really did just give the news without giving commentary and thinking they're going to mold the people? But that was my main thought. But I in listening, I wanted to just add a comment about Dr. Ford.
Sure.
I had an older man expose himself to me when I was 15 years old. And I lived in a rather small town, and I went home and I told my mother and I told my friends, and we all just said, well, how awful is that? And at that time, I found out a short time later who he was, and but we still didn't think about doing anything about it. You know, this was back in the early 1960s. But if he had wanted to become public, you know, in an office or something, that I would have had some influence in whether or not he took that office. I may have later on said something about it, but I think Dr. Ford, she's a doctor, okay? I think that if she really wanted to discuss that and not be coached and primed and the whole thing was a farce, she would have gotten up there and very succinctly spoken what she wanted to say. I think she was coached to have this little quivering voice and to kind of give the inference that she was still 15 years old or whatever she was, when this happened. I didn't have any respect for her as a professional, and I could just see that she was coached. I've never doubted Judge Kavanaugh. I heard someone say the other day on some talk show that his name will forever be tarnished. Well, it won't be in my mind.
Yeah, it won't be in my mind either.
He was a man of faith. He was a man of integrity with his family. He was total integrity on the judgeships that he had in the past.
Yep.
And there's absolutely no way that farce would ever make me think poorly of him in any way.
Thank you, Ann. And when we come back from the break, 1-800-351-1212, give us a call, and we'll go to John next.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Riley Bembry returned from World War I, a changed man. Upon his return, this former Army medic settled in Los Angeles and became a butcher. But the city could not contain him, and he headed into the Mojave Desert and became a prospector. By the time the Great Depression gripped the nation, other veterans of the Great War had found their way to Bembry's cabin, each seeking to escape the emotional and physical scars left from the war. Together in 1934, they erected a simple 7-foot monument atop a rocky outcropping not far from Bembry's cabin, but miles and miles from anything else. They chose a common symbol to honor war dead, a white cross, and dedicated it to honor the dead of all wars. When Bembry died in 1984, Henry Sandoz, Bembry's close friend, began to care for the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial Cross. In 2001, someone sued. A judge would eventually order the memorial hidden from view, literally covered with a padlocked bag, while the case was decided. First Liberty had the privilege of working with Henry Sandoz, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and others to defend that memorial. Before he was senator, Ted Cruz volunteered his time as lead counsel on the case. Because of Henry Sandoz, Ted Cruz, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and First Liberty, that memorial still stands today just where Bembry placed it in honor of the dead of all wars. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kirby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And this is Merrill Matthews on Point of View, sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and we're taking your calls. We're now going to go to John in South Carolina. John, you're on the air. Are you dry there?
Yeah, we're partly sunny, a little windy, but
so the hurricane
all
hasn't
in
got
all,
there.
we're in good shape.
Hasn't got there to you yet?
That's already passed west of us, so we're in good shape.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Yes.
I appreciate the comments that being spoken today. I appreciate point of view and all that you do. And, one thing that this brings to awareness that probably bothers me more than anything is we have stopped holding people accountable for accusations in a public forum.
Mm-hmm.
And the left know this better than anybody. Just get it out there. Let's destroy people, and we'll get away with it. We have got to start holding people accountable for accusations.
And they almost got away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even as a Christian, we're especially known as lovers of the truth. There's an interesting thing that the Apostle Paul says to the Thessalonians. He says, of unbelievers, they did not receive a love of the truth so as to become saved.
Right.
Meaning
That's right.
that it's part and parcel of being a believer that we have come to love the truth.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
I tell, real quick, I tell my wife all this all the time, it's almost as we're sheep to them, and many of the sheep are being led to the slaughterhouse, and they don't even know it.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And
thank you.
We're going to try to turn that off, and we'll go to Jerry in Texas. Jerry, you're on the air.
Good afternoon. I just had one comment. I appreciate everything that you do and the news that you give us. What I wanted to say was I see the Democrats, the liberal Democrats, as like, every despot in the history of the world. They're so sure that everything they do is right and that we need to follow their example and do what they say, that anything to advance their agenda is okay. They can lie, they can cheat, they can steal, they can even kill, and as long as it advances their agenda.
It's a strong comment.
That's where they are right now. They'll do anything. If Judge Kavanaugh had backed off and taken himself out of the running, and Trump had nominated another conservative, they'd done the same thing to him.
Oh yeah, I think so.
There almost seems to be something of a religious zeal on the part of the progressive left, that they are so zealously committed to their view that, like you suggest, almost anything is permissible in the advancing of some cause that you so deeply believe in. And of course, that's wrong. I mean, even in the service of Christianity, that would be wrong to use illicit means to support even the truth. But I think I agree with you that the left seems to have adopted that kind of almost blind religious fervor and zeal that drives them on.
Yeah.
Well, you can see it in leaders all through the history. Hitler, Mussolini, any of them. They were so sure that they were right, that anything worked, anything goes.
And that's absolutely right. Well, thank you, Jerry. And now we're going to go to another Jerry, Jerry in Arizona. Jerry, you're on the air.
Hello, how are you doing?
I think we're okay.
I'm glad. I just wanted to make a quick comment on Judge Kavanaugh and what you mentioned about the left and the current situation. First of all, I endorse Judge Kavanaugh all the way, and I was so thankful that he was confirmed to be our, next Supreme Court justice there. But what I really wanted to say also was that it's so interesting that the left is suddenly trying to portray their moral concern when they're the groups that promote homosexuality, the confusion of gender, giving contraception to kids in schools, and prohibiting parents from even finding out about that stuff. So to me, it's so ironic, not the word, maybe hypocritical, that they want to portray themselves as the moral compass. That's the biggest farce I've ever heard. And the last thing I'd like to say, and I'll get off the air here because I know you guys have a lot of calls, is that I encourage every single Christian in the USA, if they're concerned about America, to get out and vote. And if they have any wonders about our government or questions, I would encourage them to watch on a YouTube. It's called The Difference Between a Republic and a Democracy. And it really sheds light to, the dangers of democracy, because we are, last I heard and read, we are a republic, which means ruled by law. So thank you very much, and you guys keep up the good work.
Thank you, Jerry. It's it's interesting because I don't know if you remember this, Charles, but when Bill and Hillary Clinton came into the White House, they set up a movement, and there was a Jewish rabbi, I believe, and they created a magazine or something called Tikkun, which had to do with moral issues. And they essentially were trying to say, we're coming in and we're going to implement the new morality here, which is amazing given Bill Clinton's various faults and flaws and downfalls. But I think Jerry's got it right. The left sees themselves as moral, as the new morality. And the interesting thing is, back when I used to teach philosophy, if I were talking to people on the left and I would ask the question, do you think there are any moral absolutes? No, you can't go tell other people what they may have their own truth or their own beliefs, but you can't impose your values on other people. It's fine for you to have your own values. You can't impose them on somebody else. And yet we find the left trying to impose their values. And as Jerry pointed out, from same-sex marriage to LGBT communities and thing after thing, they're imposing their own morality.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most striking things about recent events over the last even several years is the complete moral reversal, is that what were formerly deemed to be accepted and normative human behaviors are now deemed to be illicit or bigoted or irrational. And it's almost like a complete moral reversal. And so they have essentially become the Puritans of the left in blindly advancing their own moral ideas.
Yes, it's a strange twist on it. That twist has been put on hold a little bit with President Trump in the office, but at some point we may see that movement, especially if Democrats win the House and Senate, or if they eventually win the White House in 2020. We may see that movement gather steam again because they'll have the controls of power.
Yes, I think at best we have seen kind of maybe something of a reprieve, maybe a slight delay, but I mean, these causes will continue to advance.
Yeah. Well, Charles, thank you for joining us today. It's interesting to see how many people are passionate about this Kavanaugh hearing, even though it's passed now. He's on the Supreme Court. But people are passionate about both what he stood for and, in many cases, passionate against what his critics had. This is Merrill Matthews. I've been sitting in today for Kirby Anderson. Go to pointofview.net and you can find out more information on the Today Show, and you also can find ways that you can help Point of View, and we would encourage you to do that. We've enjoyed the time and lots of calls, and it's been an interesting show, especially with Dr. Price talking about the temple. Merrill Matthews, closing out now. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back tomorrow.
April 18th, 1775. The long-feared approach of danger was now real. The British were moving, and Paul Revere mounted his horse for a ride that would go down in history in the battle for American liberty. 2 beacons were placed in the steeple of the Old North Church, alerting the people in Charlestown the Redcoats were coming by sea. 2 beacons shining in the night, signaling our forefathers to make their stand. Today's threats to our freedom are perhaps less visible than an army on the move, but they are no less real. Where are today's beacons, today's defenders of liberty? One is Point of View Radio. The other is you. Together, let us stand for all of our freedoms to preserve what our founders won. Be the fire in our beacon today by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Join the fight this week at pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.